The Northern Wars, often referred to as the Nilfgaard Wars or the Nordling Wars, were a series of large-scale conflicts in the latter half of the 13th century between the southern Empire of Nilfgaard and the kingdoms in the north. Under the rule of the usurper, Nilfgaard waged a campaign of aggressive expansion in the first half of the century. The empire conquered the neighboring states of Ebbing and Mecht before continuing to move north, also taking Metina and Nazair. When Emir of Emrys reclaimed the throne in 1257, he decided to continue this expansion north. In 1263, a large Nilfgaardian army led by Menno Cohorn crossed the Emel Mountains via the Marnadal Stairs and invaded the kingdom of Sintra, marking the beginning of the First Northern War. The invaders were met by the army of Sintra, led by King Aistúrcich and Queen Calanthe Fiona Rhiannon. The two sides engaged in battle, and the invading force quickly overwhelmed the Sintrans, killing King Torcich and forcing the queen and her surviving soldiers to retreat. The invaders continued across Sintra, eventually reaching the capital, which they sacked, resulting in the slaughter of countless civilians and the deaths of Queen Calanthe and most of the royal family. Following the conquest of Sintra, Cohorn moved on to the kingdom of Sodden, easily taking the region of Upper Sodden before crossing the river Yaruga into Lower Sodden. Here, the invading army was faced by a combined force of armies from the kingdoms of Edirn, Kedwin, Redania, and Temeria, as well as a contingent of northern mages. The ensuing battle, subsequently known as the Battle of Sodden Hill, would go down in history as the turning point of the First Northern War. Largely owing to the mages, many of whom lost their lives in the battle, the combined northern army was able to defeat the southern invader and halt the empire's advance. Forced to retreat back south of the river, Nilfgaard fortified their conquered territories here, and the First Northern War ended in a stalemate across the Yaruga. Sintra and the region of Upper Sodden remained under Nilfgaardian control, with Verden and Brugge, Sintra's vassals north of the river, gaining independence and becoming a vassal to Temeria respectively. The following years saw an uneasy peace between Nilfgaard and the northern realms, with both sides secretly plotting their next moves. Following the defeat at Sodden Hill, largely due to the intervention of the northern mages, Emperor Emir orchestrated a plan to take magic users out of the equation in future battles. This plan culminated in the Thanedd coup in 1267, where, during a conclave on Thanedd Island, mages supporting the Empire, aided by Scoia'tael commandos, clashed with those loyal to the north. In the ensuing violence, many mages were killed, and the Brotherhood of Sorcerers was effectively dissolved, leading to the North losing faith in its magic users, and many mages being expelled from the kingdoms they served. Meanwhile, in Haga Castle, Kings Demoven III of Edirn, Henselt of Kedwin, Vizimir II of Redania, Foltest of Temeria, and Queen Meve of Lyria and Rivia met to formulate a plan to take back Sodden and Sintra. Knowing that their allies would not support them in instigating a second war, they instead planned to stage a false flag operation to be conducted by Edirn against the fortress of Glevensingen. This attack would make Nilfgaard appear as the aggressors, and would give the northern kingdoms justification to attack, with the full support of their allies. The attack on Glevensingen and the Thanedd coup occurred in short succession of one another, and both events marked the beginning of the Second Northern War. Emperor Emir, having found out about the northern plot, had moved a large army, once again commanded by Field Marshal Menno Cohorn, into Dal Angra, ready to push north as soon as hostilities commenced. With the start of the Second War, this force crossed the Yaruga and invaded Lyria, easily capturing the fortresses of Scala and Spala before proceeding to take the capitals of Lyria and Rivia, forcing Queen Meve and her army to retreat into neighboring Edirn. The Lyrian force regrouped with King Demoven's army at Aldersburg in an attempt to halt the Nilfgaardian advance. However, despite their combined strength, they lost the ensuing battle and the Empire moved on to take Vengerberg, forcing Meve and Demoven to go into hiding. Having taken the capital, Nilfgaard was free to conquer the rest of Edirn up to the Pontar Valley, where they established a truce with Kedwin. The Empire granted King Henselt some of Edirn's territories, including the long-contested Lowmark region, in exchange for not coming to Demoven's aid. With the country under his control, Emperor Emir restored the elven kingdom of Dol Blathana in eastern Edirn as a vassal of the Empire, granting the land to the elven sorceress Francesca Findabair as a reward for her part in the Thanedd coup, as well as the continued Scoia'tael guerrilla attacks behind northern lines. Meanwhile, to the west, the northern rulers' plan to retake Sodden and Sintra hinged on strategic control of the Yaruga River and the surrounding coastline, with the mouth of the river being held by the Kingdom of Verden. The plan fell apart when King Eärvil betrayed his allies and surrendered to Nilfgaard, effectively giving the Empire control of the river. This, along with Cedwyn having backed out of the war, Redania in turmoil following the recent assassination of King Vizimir II, and the fall of Lyria, Rivia, and Edirn, left the Northern Alliance in pieces, with Temeria as the only northern kingdom still able to fight back. Knowing that he could not defeat the Empire on his own, King Foltest reluctantly signed a truce with Nilfgaard, resulting in an uneasy peace. This peace proved to be short-lived, as 16 days later, the Empire broke the truce and invaded Brugge. Launching assaults from Verden and Sintra, and aided by Scoia'tael commandos from Brokilon, Nilfgaard relentlessly conquered the Temerian vassal before continuing into Lower Sodden. After taking the castles of Roswan and Maena to solidify their control of the region, Nilfgaard moved north, where they defeated the Temerian army before laying siege to the city of Maribor. However, in doing so alongside their conquests to the east, Nilfgaard had overextended, stretching their supply lines to the limit and leaving them vulnerable. In nearby Ongren, Queen Meve had re-emerged with a small volunteer force and was waging a guerrilla war against the Empire's supply lines, including a significant victory on the bridge across the Yaruga near Redport. With diminished supplies and winter fast approaching, wanting to avoid attrition, Emperor Emir ordered a retreat in order to prepare for a renewed offense in the spring of 1268. This spring offense was to take place across 3 campaigns. The Western Assault, conducted by the Verden Operations Group under the command of Duke Joachim de Wet, was to conquer the Kingdom of Sideris and the ports of Gorsvelen and Novigrad to block Temeria's access to the coast, before proceeding to attack the country's western flank. To the east, the East Army Group, commanded by Duke Ardal Abdahi, was to break the truce with Cedwyn and take the Pontar Valley, allowing the Empire to attack Temeria's eastern flank, while also preventing Cedwyn from providing aid. Lastly, Field Marshal Cohorn would lead the Center Army Group into a frontal assault from Sodden. After taking the Temerian capital of Vizima, the 3 armies would then regroup at the Pontar River. This offense did not go to plan, starting with the Western campaign. Duke de Wet, despite having a significant tactical advantage over his intended target of Sideris, instead decided to first secure his rear by quashing a minor rebellion in Verden. He did so in a brutal fashion that only served to rile up the local populace. What had started as a small group of guerrillas became a full-scale insurrection, which ultimately assassinated King Eärvil. His successor, Prince Criston, did not share his father's loyalty to Nilfgaard, and went on to lead the resistance against the occupying force. King Athane of Sideris saw an opportunity in this chaos, and attacked Verden with aid from Jarl Krakencrate of the Skellige Islands, who had been harassing Nilfgaard's occupied territories on the coast. Thus, de Wet found himself surrounded on all sides and unable to proceed with his campaign. His failure proved that the Empire was not infallible, giving the northern forces a much-needed morale boost. The alliance that had been shattered the previous year was restored, and a joint northern force, aided by mercenaries funded by Kovir and an army of dwarven volunteers from Mahakam, advanced into Sodden. Following a costly victory at Maena, the joint northern army fell back to Vizima to regroup. This led Cohorn to retaliate, once again laying siege to the fortress. Aware of the impending threat to the east and not wanting to be caught between Abdahi and Cohorn, the Northerners resolved to go on an all-out offensive. Led by King Foltest, the entire northern force, including reserves, marched toward Maena in an attempt to prevent the Empire from taking it back. Wanting to stop these reinforcements, Cohorn divided his army, leaving his slower infantry units to continue the siege, and only taking his cavalry units north, in order to reach the approaching enemy army in time. The 2 forces subsequently clashed near the settlement of Brenna, in what is arguably the most significant battle of the Second Northern War, where a combination of bad intelligence and the unprecedented resilience of Northern soldiers in the face of an overwhelming force cost Cohorn the battle of his life. With the defeat of a large portion of Nilfgaard's central army, northern morale was at an all-time high, and the Allies began a large-scale counteroffensive across all fronts. The joint northern army resumed their original advance toward Maena, with Temerian Constable John Natalis riding ahead with the Allied cavalry. The infantry units that Cohorn had left behind had started marching north to reinforce their commander, unaware that the battle was already over. When they encountered the northern cavalry, they were caught entirely off guard and were quickly overwhelmed. After defeating the remainder of the Nilfgaardian Center Army group, rather than continuing on towards Maena, Natalis instead rode west with the intent to liberate Brugge from the Nilfgaardian occupation and engage De Wet's Verden operations group. Duke De Wet, who was already struggling against the rebels in Verden, as well as attacks from Sedaris and Skellige, could not hope to also encounter this additional offensive, and retreated back to Sintra, placing garrisons in the fortresses of Nostrog, Roserog, and Bodrog, in a bid to maintain control of the mouth of the Yaruga. To the east, Kings Henselt and Demoven settled their historic differences in order to drive out the southern invaders. Faced by a reformed Adernian army supported by Temerian troops to the west, and the Kedweni army to the north, Duke Ebdahi had no choice but to retreat south, abandoning the elves of Dolblathana to fend for themselves. Ebdahi intended to fortify his defense at Aldersburg, but shortly after arriving here, he died under mysterious circumstances. Weakened by the sudden lack of leadership, the Nilfgaardian East Army group fell to the joint Adernian and Kedweni army at the Second Battle of Aldersburg. Following this battle, the Allied forces continued south, regrouping with Queen Maeve's guerrillas to liberate Lyria and Rivia, before continuing to push Nilfgaard back into Dol Ongren where the war had begun. With all three of Nilfgaard's forces defeated and pushed back across the Yaruga, the war was drawing to a close, rather than proceeding with their original plan to retake Sintra. The northern leaders instead chose to fortify the bank of the Yaruga and begin peace negotiations. On the 2nd of April, 1268, they met with the Nilfgaardian representatives in Sintra to sign a peace treaty formalizing the end of the war. Nilfgaard was to return all occupied lands, with the exception of Sintra. This formally became part of the Empire, following Emirvar Emrys's marriage to what appeared to be Princess Cyrilla Fiona Ellen Rhiannon, heiress to the Sintran throne, who had mysteriously reappeared after the sacking of Sintra in the First War. Sodden and the neighboring regions became provinces of Temeria, while Verden retained its independence. The regions of Upper Edirn granted to Kedwen in their truce with Nilfgaard were restored, while Dolblathana became an autonomous freehold loyal to Edirn. Lastly, all Scoia'tael commanders who had fought directly for Nilfgaard or conducted guerrilla operations on their behalf were branded war criminals and were to be tried as such by the northern kingdoms. Following the cessation of hostilities, Nilfgaard continued to wage an economic war against the north. Despite having been defeated, the Empire fared much better than the northern victors, as the majority of the war's devastation and bloodshed had occurred north of the Yaruga. Rebuilding the destroyed towns, castles, and industries after an already costly war put considerable strain on the Allied kingdoms' economies, leading to widespread civil unrest, religious fanaticism, and rampant persecution of non-humans. The latter was exacerbated by continued insurgent activity from Scoia'tael guerrillas, along with the northern rulers using non-humans as scapegoats for the poor state of their kingdoms. Over the following years, the Nilfgaardian war machine began gearing up again, with its sights once more set on a now severely weakened north, held back only by the alliances between the northern rulers that had led to a united front in the previous wars. An obstacle that could be removed with a few well-executed assassinations. With the deaths of the northern rulers, very little could prevent Nilfgaard from finally conquering the north, in the event of a third war.